I'm Jessica Cloud. I'm a certified fundraising executive and consultant. And my account, Real Deal Fundraising, I come on here on TikTok every Friday at 12:30, almost without fail for the last 3 months. And we have a topic that we talk about. And if you're interested in anything to do with nonprofits and fundraising, I recommend you give me a follow and you can ask me questions right here in the chat. It's like having a free consulting session here on TikTok. But in case there are folks who are just joining, I'm going to have something that I'm going to talk through. But if I see questions pop up in the chat, I will absolutely try to answer those. And they can be about anything to do with nonprofit life, nonprofit work, and fundraising. Today, I want to talk about a really important topic, and that is what we learned from a report called the 2026 Social Impact Staff Retention Study. And they do this study every year, this organization, and I think it's almost as important as Giving USA in terms of the insight it gives us into the nonprofit industry as a whole and where we are headed in the nonprofit industry, where staff relations are concerned, because staffing is a revenue generation problem. If we can't keep good people around, if we can't keep good fundraisers around, we are going to have a problem cultivating relationships with our most closely held constituents and our most high capacity donors. So what I'm going to be doing is sharing the headline numbers and then what I saw buried deeper in the data and what that might mean for the nonprofit sector. So I want to emphasize that nothing I'm about to say is a problem with staff. So much of this is a board and leadership problem. It's a governance issue wrapped in a staff retention cloak, so to speak. So this looks like disgruntled employees or people who are wanting to leave, but when you see what they're responding to, it's going to be really clear that this is something your board should really be concerned about and taking action on today. So let's see, top line statistics. 70% of nonprofit workers are job searching right now. Now that is only 43% in the corporate sector. So this is where some of your board members might be experiencing a misalignment. That's not true in the nonprofit industry. 70% are job searching. Only 35% of people plan to stay in the nonprofit sector at all. So most of those people who are job searching are not just planning to move within the nonprofit sector, they're planning on leaving it entirely. They're exiting out the side door. The top reason for leaving? Too much responsibility, not enough support. Nothing to do with money. Nothing to do with money in there. Too much responsibility, not enough support. So I think there are 6 things that we need to talk about where this report gives us information that we really need for our boards to start thinking about in terms of money, staffing, and risk assessment. So if your board members come from those corporate backgrounds, and many of our nonprofit board members do, they may be reading this staff retention crisis in nonprofits wrong. They may look at these statistics and read them very differently. So again, 70.4% of all nonprofit workers are job searching right now. Compare that to 43% across all industries. So that means that the corporate sector, people are stabilizing, but nonprofit retention of staff is not stabilizing. And that gap is real and it's growing. So our board members who are leading in the corporate world watch their own employees settle in, and they assume that the job market has cooled off everywhere, right? But that doesn't hold true within a nonprofit when you look at these statistics. So your board is making staffing decisions based on data from a completely different sector of the economy. So that is our first lesson, is the comparison between the nonprofit job searching rates and the corporate job searching rates. So the practical takeaway here is your board should be aware of the sector-specific numbers and not assume that general labor market trends apply at nonprofits. A slower job market outside the sector will not save your team from burnout inside it, right? Yes. So we need to take care of our people inside every single nonprofit, regardless of what the trends are out in the world. So everyone thinks that staff are leaving over pay. That's the anecdotal assumption. But the data in this survey, and that is the 2026 Social Impact Staff Retention Study, it says something really different. The top reason people are leaving is too much responsibility and not enough support. And that number has been creeping up year after year for the last 3 years. In 2024, 58% of folks said that they would leave the nonprofit sector because of too much responsibility, not enough support. This year, the 2026 study, 60%. So this is an upward trend that hasn't changed. It's creeping up every single year. And the compensation complaints, meanwhile, have stayed steady. So this is not about money. It's not necessarily about salary. It is a management issue. This is a governance issue. It's workload strain. We can see it rising. We can see it in the reporting in this study. Basically, this is not a pay problem alone. This is a design problem, a governance problem, a management problem. So you might be asking yourself, Jessica, why do you say this is a governance problem? Your board approves your goals. They approve what goals they are. They often lock in revenue targets in the budget. They decide whether you're going to grow, whether you're going to grow on the program side, whether that will result in a corresponding need for growth in the fundraising, right? They decide when campaigns are done and how many campaigns you're going to have at any given point in time. And they decide how many staff you're going to have or what the budget is in order to recruit that staff. And oftentimes they increase the budgetary goal that you have to meet in the annual fund. They increase the number of campaigns you need to run. They suggest more events. And yet the staffing model stays the same. And you have the same amount of staff taking on more and more responsibility and more goals with fewer and fewer staff. I took a position and was told that my main focus would be increasing the annual fund. And I knew that pre-pandemic they had 6 staff. They gave me 4.5, including myself. So I had fewer people than they had pre-pandemic. And when I got into the position, I found out that not only was I supposed to increase the annual fund, I was supposed to do numerous constituent relationship events that I wasn't allowed to ask at. And they were piling on program goals to raise money for special programs, building campaigns to maintain our facilities. All of this being piled on top of the goal that I was told that I was brought there for. So this is where the board can be really influential in staff retention, is keeping things at a manageable level or giving staff the resources, both budgetary and staffing resources with their team in order to meet those goals and to make sure that those goals move in sync with each other. Instead of, we're going to ask you to do so much more with less in terms of resources. So the scariest number in this report, though, isn't that people are leaving. It's the people who you don't know about yet. Because this report gets at this question, it's really interesting. 38% of folks say that they're unsure whether they will stay in the sector. So that means that almost 40% of folks, they call this group the Canaries in the coal mine, because this group, they might be quiet quitting or quiet job searching. And so they're doing their job, but there may not be completely invested in the mission, completely bought into their goals. So, in fact, this group worries me a little more than the 15% who say they're going to leave the industry entirely. Why? Because unsure employees will stay physically present, but detached psychologically. And I've been in that seat myself, so I know what this feels like, right? They're going to give a lower amount of discretionary effort. They're going to meet their job, but they're going to invest less in long-term planning in their positions. They're going to be hesitant to invest in their own leadership development. So all of these things are, again, things that your CEO and your board should really be aware of. Whether or not they think it's at play in their own offices, right? So if you're leading a nonprofit, ask yourself, what would move someone from unsure to fully committed? And that is the real work of being a leader at a nonprofit these days, is making sure that you are giving your employees what they need, not only to achieve their goals, but to connect to them as people so that they will want to stay, so that they will be truly satisfied in their role. Another interesting point, we love blaming turnover for funding instability. So like people are leaving because political concerns, because grant funding got pulled, all of these different things, because the organizations are unstable. There's so much uncertainty in the economy. But the data takes that excuse away as well. 35% of people searching cited political or funding concerns as their reason, 35%. So we often say it's the economy, grants, political climate, but the solutions actually sit a lot closer to home. So what we really need to do is have more leadership support for our employees, more workload distribution that's more appropriate so people don't burn out. Role clarity. How many folks out there at nonprofits are doing 2 or 3 or 4 sort of Frankenstein jobs shoved into one, right? And they're pulled in 10 different directions with an inability to focus on one area because they're doing so many things. This is part of the problem. And then career sustainability. Like we want people to be able to grow in their role, but still stay at that organization. So are we investing in our people? Now, none of these things are external. Like they're not external forces that you can't control. These are things that your board and your CEO can absolutely pull as an internal lever to get your folks to stay more and to fix your staff retention problem, at least at the local level of your nonprofit, versus to counter at your nonprofit these bigger trends within the nonprofit sector. So fundraisers are often labeled low risk in this analysis. They actually labeled fundraising the lowest risk department because many other parts of the organization were rated much higher in terms of whether they were going to leave the nonprofit sector. But fundraisers were at 72%. 72%. That's not low risk. I don't know what world that would be considered low risk. Fundraising, looking for new opportunities, 72% of fundraisers. That's almost 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 fundraisers ready to bounce right out of the nonprofit sector. 72% of your fundraisers thinking about leaving is absolutely not stability. And that means that your donor relationships on shaky ground, your campaign continuity on shaky ground, your revenue forecast, all very unstable if 3/4 of your fundraisers are thinking about leaving, because those relationships are held by those fundraisers. And while the best fundraisers operate more as a concierge for the organization, so they're not building a friendship person to person necessarily, although that does happen over time naturally. What does happen is that when that person leaves, the person that they knew to contact, that they felt comfortable calling, your donors felt comfortable calling and asking questions and shooting off a quick text or email to that fundraiser that was their primary contact. Now they don't quite know what to do. They don't feel quite as open or willing to make that call or send that text to learn what's going on at your organization. So you end up with a gap in relationship continuity. It's inevitable when a good fundraiser leaves. So if 3/4 of your fundraisers are leaving, your relationships are at risk for your organization. So basically, if your board is only evaluating fundraising based on outcomes on a spreadsheet, this is your sign. You cannot separate fundraising revenue from the sustainability of the people generating it. So when those people leave, when they burn out, when they say, I'm done with this, I'm going to go corporate or whatever they're going to do, your revenue is going to suffer. So this is not just a people problem. This is a revenue problem too. One other interesting statistic in this report, lacking growth opportunities dropped from 58% in 2024 down to 46% in 2026. I start next week as annual fund specialist, and nervous due to high turnover. I love annual giving. That's where I came up through, was annual giving, before I expanded out and learned about other areas. And I think one of the things that you have to do is you have to keep pushing back on the difference between goals and projections. So what your board reaches up in the sky and says, hey, we need to raise this, that may not be what your constituency supports, especially if the board is disengaged. So if your board is not there helping to bring in new donors, connecting you with new groups of people, really hard to reach your goals. And that puts a lot of pressure on our annual fund folks. So learn the data, learn how to build those projections so you know what you can raise. And then you're also aware of the gap between the stated goal that you've been given from your board and what you know is actually possible given the model and the activities that you're doing now and the number of prospects that you have. And then I think you can kind of push back on that. So yeah, absolutely. Come at it from the data, talk about the revenue, and you may be able to get through to more people. So I hope that helps. On the surface, that reads like progress, but combined with the other data that shows that 70% of people are job searching right now, I don't think that it is an issue of, oh, suddenly we all have really great professional development funds. So how can we interpret this? In my opinion, people who are too overloaded, which is what they've said, too much responsibility, not enough support, they don't think about advancement. They're in survival mode. They're overwhelmed. They're not accessing their ambition for career growth because they're like, I'm just going to stay where I'm at. I don't have a lot of ambition right now. That's not a thriving talent pipeline. We shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back necessarily for that. It's actually like a warning sign buried in a good headline. Okay, so let's just talk about a couple of things here. So one question you might have is, my board keeps saying our turnover is just a nonprofit thing, and there's nothing we can really do about it. How do I push back on that? Turnover being common doesn't mean that it's acceptable or that it's inevitable, right? That workload trend, 58% looking because they're overwhelmed, 59% looking because they're overwhelmed, now 60%. It's moving up. That's not static. It's not staying the same. It's getting worse over time. So essentially, I would ask your board, what have we changed structurally in the last 2 years to match the goals that we've set? So if you've increased your goals, increased your number of events, increased the pressure that's on the fundraising team, that's the area that I come out of. What have you done to equip? Have you provided more budget? Have you invested in more technology to help them reach those goals? Have you given them access to more research? Have you given them more staff to do any of that? If the answer is no, we've just been asking the same people to do more, then that is not an issue of the nonprofit sector. That is an issue of how you are governing and managing that nonprofit. So basically, how do you bring this up with your board without having it feel like an attack? Mission commitment is still rated as strong in this study. The issue is structural confidence a lot of the time. Your board isn't failing the staff on purpose. Your boards have never been taught how nonprofit fundraising and staffing actually work together. So you got to bring the data, but not the blame. So exposing them to the fact that the study is even there, getting this on their radar. Hey, send them this video and let them know, hey, boards have a mismatch here. They think that staffing is not an issue, that staff retention is not that much of an issue. One, because they don't realize how connected it is to revenue generation, but also they don't necessarily think it operates like the corporate world, and the corporate world is stabilizing right now. People are not job searching as much. Now, the reasons they're not job searching, that's separate and different, mostly because they're all afraid of layoffs, and not a lot of places are hiring right now. But really, the issue, the crux of it is that question. What have we changed structurally in the last 2 years to match the goals that we have set? That's an important question for you to ask yourself, for your CEO to ask about the organization, and certainly for your board members to be contemplating. If we have asked more out of our staff, have we equipped them? Have we moved the tools to match the goal? Have we moved the resources to match the goal? Have we matched the support with the level of responsibility that we're asking folks to take? I hope this was helpful here today to take a little look at the staff retention survey. This is something that I look at every year. You can follow them on LinkedIn. You'll be notified when the new study comes out. It's usually, I think, in March or April. The 2026 Social Impact Staff Retention Study. That is the study I was pulling these numbers from this year. My latest blog post is up about this. So if you just go to Real Deal Fundraising website, then you're going to be able to see all of the analysis that I did on the Social Impact Staff Retention Study. Really helpful data points to expose your board and your CEO to help them understand exactly the burdens and the struggles that we deal with as nonprofit staffers. Again, usually working several jobs kind of crammed together, lots and lots of responsibility and push to reach goals and so forth. I'll see you next Friday.